Come with me, if you will, on a little journey. Earlier this summer, I found myself at a crafting yard sale at a mall. There was an art installation. The art installation had to leave where they were installed, and as a result, they were selling off a lot of their art supplies and materials. I went with my sister, we got mall Chinese food, it was a lot of fun. So while I'm digging through a back warehouse of just stuff, my sister points out a roll, a big roll, and I looked at the roll, and I had to have it. And I don't think you were prepared for what I found. It's so heavy. Extremely unassuming. Until we open this up, what my sister found is this geometric vinyl wallpaper, and a ton of it. Look at how much is on this roll. So I walked out of that crafting yard sale with a cart of stuff, including this enormous roll of vinyl wallpaper for $50. Now I'm the proud owner of probably about 40 yards of vinyl wallpaper. Pretty thrifty, if you ask me. I love a treasure hunt for cosplay, and so when I saw this, I was like, you know what? This needs to be turned into a corset. Just lay this back down. Whoa! Okay. I'm gonna see if I can make a corset out of this vinyl wallpaper. If you can see behind me on this wall, I have a pair of fairy wings. These are by Fancy Fairy. I love them very much. I simply do not wear them enough. So I want to make kind of like a fairy-inspired look. And since this wallpaper is like a dark blue and such an interesting texture with like just a hint of shimmer to it, my idea is to make kind of a night court inspired look. Now, have I read the ACOTAR series? No, that's not technically true. I read the first half of the first one. But I am a woman in my 20s, and so every single social media platform that I am on thinks that I have read ACOTAR, and so I know enough just through like cultural osmosis to know what the night court vibes are, and I really like them. I am not very good at drawing, otherwise I would provide you with a sketch of the idea I have, but I fear it would turn out like this. So instead, I'm just gonna take you along with me as I sew. And conveniently, I am wearing a mock-up that I made for my corset. The laces are a different color. I didn't buy anything for this. I ran out of ribbon. This stuff is stiff. It is no give whatsoever. So absolutely no need for anything like coutil here, but I figured the more panels I did, the riskier it was gonna be that I was gonna actually get this on my body. So really simple 5-panel corset. I am gonna make a couple fundamental changes to my mock-up. This mock-up has boning channels on the outside. My boning channels are gonna be on the inside for the corset, just because I don't want to cover this up. It's so neat. I also think I might futz with the neckline a little bit to be more of like a straight across as opposed to a sweetheart, but we'll see. But first, can I even sew through this? I have not tested it out. So let's go to the sewing machine and run a couple tests. I'm here at the sewing table with a little sliced up swatch of my wallpaper. Side note, I found this wallpaper online, $90 a meter. I decided it was probably best to fact check myself on $90 a meter, because that seemed like a lot. Turns out it is in fact $50 a yard, but 30 yard minimum purchase. So $1,500 for a roll of this stuff, which is insane. It's for commercial use only, so I kind of get it, but Also, I had to create a fake email address just to view the price of this, which was obnoxious. Here's just another look at the texture. It's so neat. Here's the back side of the wallpaper. It has like a crisscross, not quite fabric backing, but I think it's thin enough that I will be able to stitch through it okay, at least. First thing I'm gonna do is gonna swap my needle to a denim needle because I don't think an all-purpose needle is gonna cut it. I think I would do some damage if I tried to sew through this with a universal needle. If you're a little unfamiliar with sewing, that's okay. A denim needle is just a lot thicker and stronger than a universal needle, so you use it on like jeans, you can use it on faux leather, which I tend to do a lot of. Let's take some of this. What I'm gonna do is just make my stitch length pretty long and see if I can go through 2 layers of this. I'm nervous. It would help if the machine were on. Oh! Okay. That worked. That worked pretty well, actually. You can definitely see the stitches, but I think that's because I used a pretty long stitch length, but feels pretty tough. Sewing it works. I'm definitely not gonna use my nice fabric scissors to cut off pieces of this. Let's do a slightly shorter stitch length. Let's slow that down. You can still see the stitch lines. That's the longer stitch length, that's the shorter one. So that might just be unavoidable. And if I'm not using lime green thread, then you probably won't be able to see them at all. Now that I know I can do it, it's possible. Let's get started. Before I can get to the wallpaper part of the corset, I need to make the lining. So I grabbed some blue cotton from my stash. Since this is just a project for fun, I'm not going to worry about drafting my own pattern, so I'm using this simplicity one. I laid out my pattern pieces, pinned the fabric together, and cut them all out. I added some iron-on interfacing to the back to prevent the cotton fabric from warping. Then the lining got stitched together. To reduce bulk on the curved seams, I used my pinking shears, but you can also just cut notches with your regular fabric scissors. And the most important part of making your projects look nice is pressing all of those seams flat. And here's the lining done! Time to move on to the support systems of the corset. The first thing I'm adding is a waist tape made out of some grosgrain ribbon from my stash. You'll notice that most of this is stash stuff. A waist tape does a couple of things in a corset. First, it helps it not warp in the places where the material is put under the most tension, and it also helps keep the corset on your body. Nobody wants to be constantly yanking up their corset all day. It's pretty easy to install. I just marked my waistline at the seams and pinned it to the seam allowance and sewed it down. Next, it was time for boning channels. Once again, I'm using some satin ribbon from my stash, and since I only had 7/8 of an inch ribbon, I'm doing double boning channels. I cut the length of the ribbon for the channel and gave the edges a quick melting because satin ribbon is very prone to fraying. Then I pinned the ribbon down over the seam line. At the machine, I sewed down both edges of the ribbon and then right down the middle of the ribbon to make one channel into 2. Sewing boning channels is not my favorite. It takes a long time, but it turned out great. All right, I have my wallpaper, and now that I have the lining all assembled, it's time to actually cut out the self, or just the shell of the corset. So I have my pattern pieces, and then I have the washers that I use as pattern weights, and I'm just gonna use a heat-soluble marker to draw on my pattern pieces before I cut them out. I knew this wallpaper was thick, but cutting out all of these pieces actually made my hands a little sore. It was quite the task. Once I got all the pieces cut out, I just had to sew them together. I didn't want to use pins since this is vinyl and it can't self-heal like regular woven fabric would, so I used clips. Usually with fabric, it at least has a little bit of give and stretch to it so you can kind of ease the curved seams together, but this had absolutely zero stretch. It is 100% stiff. So curves along the bust seams especially were a little tricky. And then, armed with my denim needle equipped machine, I got all of those seams stitched up. I made sure to go slow because I really didn't want to break my needle, and thankfully that worked. I can't really iron the seams flat since this is plastic. So instead I'm flattening the seams with my fingers and then just slowly and carefully sewing them down about 1/4 inch away from the seam. This makes everything look a lot smoother. And it's possible I perma-dulled my pinking shears, but I did pink the bust seams. So last night I finished the shell. And this is such a cool thing about corsets, is really what is giving them the shape of corset is the way the fabric is cut and sewn, just the way that you are sewing the seams to each other. Now this, a pretty exaggerated shape, I must say. But I have my lining all sewn, I have this all sewn, and now it's time to attach it together. But first, I am going to alter the neckline a little bit. This is more of a sweetheart neckline. I want it to be more of a scoop. I'll show you how I'm gonna get all of this finished and then put together. To figure out where I wanted to adjust the neckline of the corset, I just held it up on me and roughly marked it out in the mirror. I refined my lines with a curved ruler and cut the neckline. I used the piece I cut off of the lining to mark where I was going to cut the neckline of the vinyl piece. And you can also see here that I could just not stitch down the seam allowance of the bust. I definitely should have notched the seam allowance instead of pinked it, But even then, it was so tough to maneuver it through the machine, so I just left it, which is not ideal, but it's such a small part of the overall corset, and this is, again, just a for fun project, so I'm not that worried about it. Then to prepare to install the boning, I serged the top edge and sides of my lining piece. Now it is time to add the boning to the lining. The lining is doing the most lifting, heavyweight work of this corset, because I put the waist tape and the boning channels in there. So I'm gonna be using my big old roll of boning. I do know that some people like to use zip ties for their boning. Here's the thing with that. Long run, this is way cheaper than zip ties. Zip ties are kind of expensive. So if you're gonna be making a lot of corsets, or you just like to have stash stuff on hand, I would just recommend a roll of plastic boning. I got this from Wawak. If you want to be really fancy, you can use spiral steel boning, and I do have some of that. I don't tend to use that in cosplays though, because it's a cosplay. You know, first things first, I'm gonna take my bone, and then I'm gonna kind of snip the ends. Now, in order to keep this from poking through, you can sand it down so the tip is more curved and smooth. I'm just gonna put a little bit of hot glue on it, just a little bit, to take away the edge so it doesn't stab through the serged edge of my lining. You can do real measurements if you so desire, and then I'm gonna be serging the bottom edge of this. So I just take this and give it a little snip. And then same thing. Trim the corners and just a little dab will do ya. And then all I have to do is just slide the bones in, if I can get it in the hole. Sometimes this is tricky, especially with satin ribbon, because it just wants to fray so badly. It doesn't super matter which way you position the bones, because as you wear this and as it kind of heats, the plastic kind of heat forms to your skin a little bit, and you're putting tension on it, so it'll go where it's gonna go. I'm mostly gonna put my bones out this way, because this part of the corset is what is, it's gonna be concave. So now I just have to do that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 more times. I got all the boning channels trimmed, glued, and slid in, and it really smoothed out a lot of the wrinkles that were in the satin boning channels. Then, being very careful to avoid the boning with the needles and the cutter, I serged the bottom edge closed to keep everything in. And it's finally time to assemble the two pieces. I matched up the seams and used my sewing clips to hold everything together before taking it over to the sewing machine and sewing it up. This is going to leave the wallpaper edges raw, but I figured that bias binding them would look kind of goofy, and it's definitely not gonna fray, so I'm just leaving it. It has about a 1/4 inch top stitch away from the edge. Also, this was so hard to sew. It was so bulky and stiff. And here it is! Time for the worst part of corset making, grommets. As you can see, I did one full side first off camera before I filmed because these are tricky, but doing one full side makes it easier to mark out where the grommets on the other side are going to go. Since these grommets are quite large, I needed to make a rather big hole for them to fit into, and this foam circle cutter I have just happened to make the perfect size hole, which was much faster and easier than trying to cut a circle out with scissors on this thick vinyl. Then I just used the grommet setting kit that came with them and hammered them in. I hate doing this. I looked up how much a grommet press was after this, and it's like $40. I'm sorely tempted to buy one next time I do something like this because my grommets turned out a little wonky and I smacked my hand with the hammer a couple times. It works! Wow, nothing cuter than a corset and soccer shorts. What a vibe. I forgot to do a test, hold on. Yep, we're okay. Fit-wise, fits good enough, I would say. I have just some random laces on. Eventually I'll get some that match. I couldn't get the cups to lay flat, so they are pretty 50s bullet bra. But that's okay. I think it'll still look nice in pictures. I also need to cut this down because it's really just digging into my skin. So is it comfortable? No. But does it look so cool? Yes. I can't just make a corset and toss on the wings and call it a day. That's not good enough. There needs to be more. And more there will be. Let me show you. We're making a night court look. So I found this embroidered tulle with stars and moons. I have about 7 yards of it. I found it on Etsy, so I will link it in the description. I gave it a little pre-wash because it did smell a little funny when it came to my house. But with this, I'm going to make some sleeves, a skirt, and then maybe just like a little, that's gonna rub on the mic, but maybe just a little draped bit over the bust to make it look more like a dress. But I think this is gonna turn out just so cool. I'm so excited. I think it goes with the geometric kind of texture really well. All right, for the dress portion of this costume, we're going to make what I like to call barely a skirt. It is going to be extraordinarily easy. All I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take some elastic. I like thick elastic because I just feel so secure. I'm just gonna measure a piece around my waist, a little bit of stretch, snip. All right, and now down to the floor where I'm going to cut out the skirt piece for my fabric. What I'm just gonna do is a long gathered skirt with a slit up the side. So I'm just gonna cut out a rectangle and attach it to the elastic. The general rule of thumb when you're doing like a gathered skirt is 1.5 times your waist measurement. So I'm just gonna take 1.5 and cut that out. You know what, never mind. I'm gonna do 2 times the length because this tulle is very lightweight, very thin, and I think it'll look so pretty with all the embroidered bits. I want this to look very intentionally like flowy and long and mystical, so I'm not even gonna hem it. It's just gonna be too long for me and have a lot of extra fabric, and I think that's gonna look nice. I'm also being careful to cut this very evenly because you know what doesn't fray? Tulle. So you know who's not gonna hem any of these pieces? Me. If I ever do decide I want to wear this out, I can just use something like a skirt hike or kind of tuck it up into my corset. I think there are a number of ways I could approach that. Yay!
What are you doing? Are you recording?
A little, just making a skirt. Very fancy. It's like barely a skirt though. So this gathered up around the old waist, a little leggy. Perfect. Since I made my skirt waist quite long, I decided to pre-gather it with a straight stitch. If it were shorter, I would just stretch the elastic to the length of the fabric while I sewed, but this kept the gathers more even. And if I was using a thinner elastic, I would just fold over the top and make an elastic channel. I clipped the waistband to the skirt and used my serger to sew them together, as well as closing up the side seam. And now it's time for barely a sleeve. I took 2 rectangles of my tulle and then strips of elastic for my wrist and upper arm. I sewed elastic channels on each side, and also, please appreciate that I matched my nail polish to the fabric. And then I fed the elastic through the channels. A safety pin made this a lot easier. Then I just folded that rectangle in half and sewed it up the side, flipped it inside out, and I had a very cute little bubble sleeve. The outfit's done, getting ready for a little photo shoot to complete the look. I've added some ears. I'm gonna be using some glitter fishnet tights, obviously some body glitter, because exciting. And then Amazon's finest star crown jewelry. Hi, it's the end of the video and change of scenery. I am in my car. I had an event today and I figured I would take the little wallpaper corset out for a spin, and honestly, it did really well. I think my instinct for less panels was incorrect. I think more panels would have offered a little bit more support because it does buckle a little bit, but it's not like I'm gonna run out of this material anytime soon. So if I ever feel like remaking it, that is totally an option. I did go for a little bit of a different vibe because I did not want to wear wings in public. Because if you've ever worn wings in public, you know, kind of a disaster. But overall, it fits really well. It's really pretty, and I really like the rest of the outfit. Added some different accessories, and it's just really fun. It's fun to wear something you made out and show it off, and that's, you know, that's a fun part of cosplay. If you are interested in seeing more of my crafting and sewing and cosplay content, you can subscribe to my channel. If you want a little more up to the minute of what I'm working on, I am on Instagram and TikTok. I still have so much of this wallpaper left, so if you have an idea of what I should make with it, leave a comment, let me know. And with that, thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye!